Manifest destiny, to overspread and to possess the whole of the continent, which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federated self-government entrusted to us. John Lewis O'Sullivan.
Perhaps there has been no greater idea that has enticed the minds of a people like that of manifest destiny, a captivating concept that ignited the imagination of America, fueling its ambition and shaping its future. With the dawn of the 19th century, the young American nation began to look further west as its settlers crossed the Appalachians. From the foot of the Rocky Mountains to the west bank of the Mississippi River, the French occupied the lands known as the Territory of Louisiana, a swath of approximately 828,000 square miles of land in the heart of North America. Due to strained finances due to his wars in Europe and concerns over maintaining control over the territory due to a potential English front in the north of the territory, Napoleon Bonaparte, first consul of France, decided to sell Louisiana to the United States. President Thomas Jefferson dispatched a diplomatic delegation led by James Monroe and Robert Livingston to Paris, charged with negotiating the purchase of New Orleans and West Florida. Astonishingly, they found themselves presented with the opportunity to acquire the entire territory of Louisiana. On April 30th, 1803, the United States agreed to pay a sum of $15 million to France in what became known as the Louisiana Purchase. Adjusted for inflation, this figure amounts to roughly $312 million in modern terms, an extraordinary bargain for the acquisition of land that more than doubled the size of the nation. With the acquisition of the Mississippi River and the strategic port of New Orleans, the United States gained unrivaled access to the vital trade routes of the Mississippi Basin and the Gulf of Mexico. This newfound control over commercial navigation spurred westward expansion. However, it would be difficult to settle into a land that was vague and poorly explored. In 1804, President Jefferson commissioned Captain Meriwether Lewis and Lieutenant William Clark to explore the newly acquired territory, embarking on a perilous expedition west. The Lewis and Clark expedition provided valuable scientific, geographic, and ethnographic insights into the vast West, becoming a useful tool for future American exploration. However, there was a problem for the white American settlers. The West had already been settled by a myriad of various First Nations that lived there centuries longer than the settlers had ever been. The fertile lands and newly discovered gold mines inhabited by various First Nations were coveted by white settlers who sought to establish enterprises in America's southeast. The influx of settlers, particularly in Georgia, intensified the pressure to remove indigenous peoples from their ancestral territories. Thus, under President Andrew Jackson, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 was born. The Indian Removal Act of 1830 provided a legal framework for the forced relocation of First Nations. Despite the facade of voluntary agreements, many nations were coerced or faced military force if they resisted relocation to designated Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. The 5 civilized tribes of the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw, and Seminole were forced on a relentless forced march westward on the Trail of Tears, so called because some 17,000 people undertook the journey marked by appalling conditions and immense suffering. Over 4,000 people died due to starvation, disease, and exposure. Another obstacle blocked America's path westward: the Mexicans. The Texas Revolution and the Mexican-American War truly gave birth to the concept of manifest destiny, seeing America take large swaths of land, this time by conquest. The Texas Revolution emerged as the first test of manifest destiny's resolve. From 1835 to 1836, Anglo-American settlers and Hispanic Texans revolted against Mexican rule in the province of Texas. Led by figures like Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin, the Texan rebels fought against the Mexican army under the command of General Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. The pivotal Battle of San Jacinto, with its resounding Texan victory and the capture of Santa Anna, secured Texas's independence and laid the groundwork for future expansionist endeavors. With Texas now an independent republic, the United States turned its gaze towards annexation. However, the Mexican government vehemently opposed this move, viewing it as a flagrant violation of their territorial sovereignty. The dispute over the Texas border helped set the stage for the Mexican-American War. President James K. Polk, a staunch proponent of Manifest Destiny, seized the opportunity to pursue territorial gains and escalate the conflict. In 1846, the Mexican-American War erupted, as American forces clashed with the Mexican army on multiple fronts. Battlefields such as Palo Alto, Buena Vista, and Cerro Gordo witnessed fierce engagements, displaying the superior military prowess of the United States. Commanding generals like Zachary Taylor and Winfield Scott emerged as national heroes, executing bold strategies that resulted in significant territorial acquisitions. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848 concluded the war, granting the United States vast territories, including California, New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, and parts of Colorado and Wyoming. However, the American government and Manifest Destiny was yet satisfied. The Oregon Country, encompassing present-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming, as well as parts of Canada's British Columbia, was the subject of a territorial dispute between the United States and Great Britain. American pioneers and British fur traders had already established a presence in the area, leading to heightened tensions and competing assertions of sovereignty. To fortify its claims, the United States encouraged westward migration through the establishment of the Oregon Trail. Starting in Independence, Missouri, the Oregon Trail stretched some 2,000 miles across the Great Plains and into mountains and forests as it entered the Pacific Northwest. Unwavering conviction in America's exceptionalism propelled some 400,000 settlers westward during its heyday from the mid-1840s to the late 1860s, imbued with a vision of a new frontier and a better future. The culmination of the Oregon border dispute arrived with the signing of the Oregon Treaty between the United States and Great Britain in 1846. The treaty resolved the conflicting claims over the Oregon Country and delineated the border at the 49th parallel, providing the United States with control over present-day Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and parts of Montana and Wyoming, except for Vancouver Island. The discovery of gold on January 24, 1848, in the remote American River at Sutter's Mill near present-day Sacramento by James W. Marshall, marked the dawn of the California gold rush. News of this momentous find spread like wildfire, igniting a feverish desire for fortune among people from every corner of the globe. Over 300,000 potential prospectors took the Oregon and California trails west in search of gold in California's rivers. The influx of fortune seekers sparked a wave of settlement that shaped the nascent society of California. The rapid establishment of mining towns, such as Sacramento, San Francisco, and Stockton, witnessed the rise of vibrant communities marked by an intense spirit of enterprise and lawlessness. The chaotic nature of the gold rush created an urgent need for governance and a semblance of law and order. In response, the California State Legislature was established in 1849, hastening the process of statehood. The nascent government grappled with challenges such as establishing mining regulations, combating lawlessness, and safeguarding property rights. These efforts culminated in the framing of the California Constitution in 1849 and subsequent admission to the Union as the 31st state in 1850. With the acquisition of vast lands through the Louisiana Purchase, the Mexican-American War, and the Oregon Treaty, the federal government faced the challenge of attracting settlers to these sparsely populated regions. The Homestead Act of 1862, signed into law by President Abraham Lincoln, looked to solve this issue by providing aspiring homesteaders with an unprecedented opportunity to claim public lands for settlement and cultivation. The act offered 160 acres of land to any citizen or intended citizen, regardless of race, be they individuals or heads of families, who met the criteria specified in the legislation. The potential for free land drew the attention of hundreds of thousands of settlers, leading to the further settlement of the Great Plains in states like Kansas. By 1890, the federal government had granted 373,000 homesteads on some 48 million acres of undeveloped land. And with the settlers and wagon trains came the railroads and locomotives. By being connected to a railway network, the new towns and agricultural communities in America would be connected to the rest of the country, and through that, the rest of the world. In 1863, the Central Pacific Railroad embarked on its ambitious journey from Sacramento, California. Under the visionary leadership of Theodore Judah and later Leland Stanford, the Central Pacific Railroad was constructed across the formidable Sierra Nevada mountains. Simultaneously, the Union Pacific Railroad commenced its construction in Omaha, Nebraska in 1865. Led by Grenville Dodge and later Thomas Durant, the Union Pacific Railroad stretched westward across the Great Plains and into the Rocky Mountains. Workers from diverse backgrounds, including Chinese immigrants, Irish immigrants, and Civil War veterans, faced grueling conditions, enduring extreme weather, hazardous terrain, and arduous labor. Their unwavering dedication and relentless spirit triumphed, however, and on May 10, 1869, the last spike connecting the two railroads was struck at Promontory, Utah. The completion of the Transcontinental Railroad signaled the end of the days of wagon trains, as new settlers could travel into the West by locomotives, guaranteed not to go hungry or fall victim to First Nation raiding parties during their travels. The First Nation raiding parties were just one symptom of America's increasingly hostile approach to dealing with its indigenous population. The westward expansion of the United States brought settlers into traditional First Nation territories, leading to increased tension over land and resources. Broken treaties, encroachments on indigenous lands, and cultural clashes sparked conflict. Both sides resorted to armed confrontations and skirmishes. The Dakota War, Sioux Wars, Nez Perce War, and Red Cloud's War are just some of the various conflicts that took place across the U.S. as many First Nations stood their ground. The Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, perhaps the most renowned engagement of the Indian Wars, came about due to the discovery of gold in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Unimpeded white settlers onto traditional Sioux land led to the famed battle, ultimately witnessing the death and annihilation of General George Armstrong Custer and his troops in a near-mythological last stand. Led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, First Nations forces successfully defended their lands, albeit temporarily. Not only did America try to stamp out indigenous resistance through war, but through assimilation as well. The Dawes Act of 1887, also known as the General Allotment Act, was designed to assimilate indigenous peoples into mainstream American society. Its underlying objective was to undermine tribal communal landholding practices and promote individual land ownership among First Nations. Under this act, reservation lands were divided into smaller, individually owned plots, with the surplus land being made available for non-native settlement. The widespread devastation gave rise to the Ghost Dance, a spiritual movement that spread among First Nations, offering hope of a revival of their ancestral ways of life and resistance against further encroachment. Fearing the Ghost Dance movement as a threat, the U.S. government dispatched troops to disarm the Lakota Sioux at Wounded Knee Creek in 1890. However, a series of misunderstandings and escalating tensions led to an outbreak of violence. U.S. soldiers opened fire indiscriminately, resulting in the deaths of approximately 300 indigenous peoples, including women, children, and the elderly at the Wounded Knee Massacre. In 1890, the Census Bureau announced the closing of the American frontier, as there were no apparent tracts of land without settlers. The march of progress of manifest destiny had taken its toll and left its mark. The acquisition of vast territories such as the Louisiana Purchase, the Oregon Territory, and the Mexican Cession gave way to gold rushes and vast timber reserves with great fervor, resulting in the exhaustion of many frontier regions. As hundreds of thousands of settlers moved west, seeking freedom and opportunity, they also brought with them the displacement and marginalization of indigenous peoples, nearly extinguishing their way of life and culture. And even then, the rapid growth of industrial centers in the East powered by advancements in manufacturing and technology, attracted many potential pioneers to urban areas, diverting attention and resources away from westward expansion. In 1890, Manifest Destiny in America ended. However, this did not mean that died, for it took a new form in the shape of overseas imperialism. War with the Spanish and the annexation of Hawaii, both in 1898, saw America become an overseas colonial power, allowing America to reliably involve itself in future global disputes and wars to come.